Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Kellen, and I'm here today to talk to you about traditional witchcraft. Specifically, what is traditional witchcraft? This is a big part of the book that I wrote, The Crooked Path, an introduction to traditional witchcraft. So kind of a good starting point when talking about traditional witchcraft is breaking down first the term traditional. I think this is what throws a lot of people off. Uh-oh, I feel choppy. Your feed is a bit choppy. Oh, sounds like I'm gargling. Headphones. Don't. Oh. Okay. Um. Thank you, everyone. This is embarrassing. Is it better now? Okay. Oh gosh, I'm pretty retrograde. Well, you can just enjoy looking at me feeling really embarrassed for just a moment. Just trying to get this going. Does it sound better? Is it okay? An old Godzilla movie? Oh no. Okay. Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm literally trying to um, get this going on my phone. Oh, okay. Oh, that's so strange. Okay. Now I'm on my phone. Okay, is this better? Yay! Okay. 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 Can people hear me now? Is this okay? Okay. Ugh, I should have never trusted my computer. Good for writing, not good for streaming, I guess. Okay. Well, anyways, starting over. Hello and welcome. My name is Keldon. Um, I am here today to talk to you about traditional witchcraft. Specifically, what is traditional witchcraft? This is a big part of the book that I recently wrote, The Crooked Path, An Introduction to Traditional Witchcraft. Okay, so where to start? What is traditional witchcraft? This is a question I get a lot. And the first place I like to go when defining it is, what does it mean to be traditional? Because I think that's a very loaded word. When we think of traditional, we tend to think of something that is really ancient, it's really old, and it's something that has not changed, right? So in all of the many years that that thing has existed, it's remained the same. And so when you put that word in front of the word witchcraft, you get the sense that this is a very old form of witchcraft that has remained the same since ye old times, whatever that time might be. That's not what traditional witchcraft is. So kind of rethinking the term traditional, we need to realize that first, traditions don't have to be super old. Traditions are developing all the time. New traditions develop. It's just a matter of mindfully repeating a behavior or an event, a celebration, what have you. So traditions don't have to be super old. Granted, we tend to give kind of maybe more merit or credit to traditions that are of a certain age, but that's because they've had more time to generate meaning. They develop more story as they go. The second part of it is that traditions aren't static. Traditions change. They develop, a lot of times they develop out of older traditions. This is because in order for a tradition to survive, it needs to update. Otherwise, it becomes outdated and people kind of stop caring, especially like some traditions really don't age well. As times change, as people learn and grow, traditions have to as well. So with that being said, traditions don't have to be super old and they don't have to be static. They don't exist encased in amber. They're not created in a vacuum. So now we got that out of the way. Then what does it mean? What does it mean for this witchcraft to be traditional? The traditions that it refers to are the traditions of folklore. So traditional witchcraft is a path that is rooted in folklore. Folklore being stories, myths, legends, songs, customs, superstitions. So those things are of the past, right? And we look to those things to influence and inform our craft. One of the major places in traditional witchcraft we look is into the trials, the confessions, the records of the witch trials. This is because within those confessions, within that, there's a generated folklore. There is a folklore about witchcraft and about magic. And that's something that was tapped into during those witch trials. So this is a long, that's a rabbit hole I can go down. But the sake of time, just thinking about the people who were confessing, even under torture and all of that. It's not to say that those people were confessing to things that they actually did, but that they were basing those confessions. They were even interrogators who maybe were inserting their own beliefs to complete their own agenda, is that they were pulling from an already established body of myth. And it created new myths, right? So that's that changing process. And we know from just the kind of history of the modern witchcraft revival starting in the 1950s is that those trial records, those confessions, influenced people like Margaret Murray, who went on to influence Gerald Gardner, who went on to influence. So, like, we as witches are part of this ongoing narrative of folklore. And in traditional witchcraft, we really focus in on that as a means of inspiring our craft. Now, we might look at old examples of folk magic, right? So maybe the practices of the European cunning folk. And we find examples of spells or charms that they used. That's great. But we like to update those things. We like to find a way to adapt them to fit the modern context of our life. Because traditional witchcraft is also not about pretending that we live in the past, right? There's no point in that. We want things to have meaning and purpose to our lives now. Traditional witchcraft, above all else, maybe, I don't know, that's kind of a strong phrase, but is practical. It's a practical path. It is about meaning. And so we want to make sure that those things work for us, that they feed our magic, that they allow us to tap into our spirits. So folklore is a big part. So then what are the key practices of traditional witchcraft? So I look at it as there being three key elements of traditional witchcraft. The first one is working with magic. So this kind of opens up a debate about whether or not witchcraft is a religion, a spirituality, a craft. And we'll get into that in just a second. But a big part of traditional witchcraft is that operative form of magic, working spells, working rituals, tapping into the unseen forces of the universe to help manifest your desires, your wishes, all of those things. Typically, we do this by using folk magic. So again, I kind of briefly touched on the European cunning folk, but a big part of the lore we tap into is the recorded practices of folk magic. So the magic used in traditional witchcraft tends to be very down to earth, tends to use a lot of everyday materials, things you can find in your kitchen, in your garden, out in the woods. Spells tend to be very free-flowing, tend to be spoken from the heart. Same thing with rituals. Rituals tend to be very ecstatic, not very scripted, kind of wild, I guess. And within traditional witchcraft, we have these three basic rituals that kind of exist throughout different permutations of tradcraft. So we have the compass round, which is a ritual of setting space, of creating a liminal space, of creating a space which then allows you to navigate into the other worlds. We have treading the mill, which is a rite of raising power, of transinduction. It can be used as another way of going into the other worlds. And then we have the Hoozle rite, which is a rite of thanksgiving, of spirit communication, of offering. And again, those rituals tend to be very free-flowing. There might be some structure to them, but it tends to be a lot more loose and spontaneous. So magic, working magic. The second part, the second element is working with the other world. A big part of traditional witchcraft is working with spirits. So we do this largely by crossing into the other worlds via the practice of hedge crossing. We work with spirits such as ancestors, familiar spirits, fetch spirits, the fair folk, a whole host of spirits. We do work, some traditional witches work with deity, some do not. Again, it's a very individualized practice. So moving forward, I know I'm moving through this really quick. I'm trying to keep myself from being really long-winded. So then the third part is working with the natural landscape, the concept of bioregionalism, working with the land that is right directly under your feet. What are the plants that grow in your region? What are the stones you can find in your region? What are the spirits that exist in your region? The genus loci, the land wights, the fair folk, really forming meaningful relationships with that land you live on. So real quick, opening kind of back into that conversation about whether or not it's a religion or spirituality, that's largely up to the individual practitioner and how they define those two terms. I like to think of witchcraft as being a generally non-denominational practice. Typically we associate it with paganism, but there's a long history of dual faithism, especially in that folk magic. So mixing earlier pagan elements with Christian imagery. So I think that witchcraft can be incorporated into any religion, whether that's paganism or Christianity or anything else. That's up to the individual practitioner, or they don't have to. They don't have to incorporate religion. They don't have to work with gods. That's all on your own path. The final piece of this is that traditional witchcraft is non-Wiccan. Now, that's a whole talk in itself of what that means, but I'll leave you with this image that Wicca is a very specific subset of witchcraft. I look at it as two tree trunks growing out of the same base. And so you have Wicca, which then has all of its many branches, and then you have everything else. And this is maybe, all of the other witchcraft traditions, and this would largely be traditional witchcraft. But they draw from the same roots. They draw from the same folklore, and they kind of take it in different directions. Neither one is better than the other. They are just two sides of the same coin. So I know I went through all that really fast. I want to make sure I have time for questions. So to sum, traditional witchcraft is an umbrella term for many different paths of non-Wiccan witchcraft that is focused in folklore, that works operatively with magic, specifically usually folk magic, engages with the other worlds, and focuses in on the natural landscape. So that is a very quick, very early morning, coffee-fueled run through what is traditional witchcraft. So at this point, I'll open up to questions. I know it is so much. I usually do this workshop as like an hour. So this was a fun challenge, and I tend to be a very long-winded person. So so thank you for being here, and yeah. Okay, so first question from Jennifer: do you celebrate the Wheel of Year? Yes, in a sense. So as part of that bioregionalism, we tend to create our own system of seasonal celebrations that might look a lot like the Wheel of Year, but we want to make sure that the holidays that we're celebrating are actually syncing up to what's happening in our environment. So if you, for example, the example I use a lot is like um, where I live, when it's the spring equinox, it's still very much winter here. There's still a ton of snow. So I don't usually feel like that's a good marking point for me of like when spring begins. I usually focus in on like what are the natural signals. So a big one that I use is geese. And I talk about this in the book, is that I mark my kind of autumnal and springtide rituals on the migration of geese and when they leave and when they come back. So we do celebrate seasons, we do celebrate those things, but we tend to try to create our own wheel, our own system that is maybe more in sync with the natural landscape. So this question, when you mentioned the history of witchcraft, shouldn't we always incorporate traditions from the past? That's a good question. I think that comes down to your motivation of why and how you are incorporating those things. Are you incorporating those things from the past because you are actively trying to recreate them, which is not necessarily bad, right? But I think, again, it comes down to that piece about what meaning does that have? Sometimes there's this need for a feeling of authenticity, right? Totally natural. And in that need, sometimes it causes us to really feel that need to incorporate things from the past, because we usually give a lot of weight to things from the past as being authentic. But just remember that those things were new at one point too. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. So you say that traditional witchcraft is a form of cult environment. Then how do solitary witches come into that? Traditional witchcraft can be solitary. It can be coven based. Honestly, I feel like by and large, it tends to be a solitary path. There are traditional witchcraft covens. There are traditions, like specific traditions of traditional witchcraft, such as the Clan of Tubal Cain or the Cult of Sabati. So it's up to the individual. Really, I'm a solitary practitioner. That suits my needs. Although it's kind of interesting thinking of being solitary, because it's like I have this group of spirits that I work with, and I kind of tend to think of us as a little coven. Looks like lots of comments about the artwork on my walls. So this is a painting of the Baba Yaga's house. That's a painting I did. I love her. So yeah. Any other questions? I'm trying to see. Oh, we still have lots of time. We still have 6 minutes. Thank you again for being here. I know it's like early, kind of. I don't know. I feel like that's I'm kind of a late riser, so I'm riding this morning wave. And definitely, if you're interested in learning more, definitely check out my book. I go a lot more eloquently into these topics. Do you prefer to do rituals in the evening or day? I prefer in the evening. Although I guess I've never really thought about if I have a super strong preference. in either way. I do like evening just because I like to be able to see the moon when I can. So, but daytime is good too. Do you have any favorite resources to recommend for solitary witches? In terms of resources, I think YouTube, the witchcraft community on YouTube is a really valuable resource, especially like in terms of community, right? Because like even being solitary, like it's good to be able to connect with other witches, and so there's a whole bunch of really awesome witches on YouTube, and that's a really great resource. In terms of books, I there's so many books that I would recommend. I love books. So I think I'm going to be a self-promoter and just say check out my book, because I have a pretty awesome, if I do say so myself, bibliography in the back with tons of books I recommend. So check that out. Do I have a website? Yes. Okay. So you can find more. You can find me on YouTube. If you just search Keldon, like Keldon Mercury, Keldon Witchcraft, I'll pop up. I have my Pathos blog by Athame and Stang. Those are the two major areas where you can find more resources. I'm also on Instagram too. I mean, if you're into Instagram, you can just look up Keldon Mercury. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Llewellyn. That's a good one. I didn't talk about the title. What does it mean to be a crooked path? So traditional witchcraft is often referred to as the crooked path. That is a term that was coined by the late Andrew Chumbley, who is the founder of Sabbatic Craft, or the cultist Sabbati in its group form. I think about the crooked path as having many meanings. So one of them is that it represents the dual nature of the witch in folklore, as being someone who is able to help or someone who is able to harm. And that's very much a part of traditional witchcraft, is that path of personal sovereignty, of, being someone who is capable of doing beneficial magic, but also who's capable of doing baneful work when the need arises. There's also kind of this idea of the crooked path being walked by somebody who has kind of an off-kiltered view of the world, which allows us to see into the world of spirits. Cecil Williamson, the founder of what is now the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic, often talked about seeing the world upside down. And so the crooked path represents that kind of skewed view that allows us to see in between all the things and the underlying magic. In that same sense, it represents the vacillation of the witch between this world and the spirit world. Right. So someone pointed out right and left hand path. Yes. It's that snaking movement between the two. So going between the mundane world and the spirit world. Also, just the fact that traditional witchcraft is a tricky path to walk. It can be difficult to navigate because it really challenges you. And you have to be prepared for that. You have to be prepared to find your own way. And it's a very wild path. So that is why it's called the crooked path. This book helps walk you through the initial miles of that path, and then leading you up to your own journey. So, yeah. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you so much. It was an awesome time.